Hello and welcome to this video on the causes and effects of change. The world around us is constantly shifting, and some would argue that the rate of change now is faster than it's ever been. And this applies to businesses too. The business world is constantly changing and businesses have to respond to this. Some businesses struggle to respond and go obsolete. Some businesses thrive under new management and change. Some businesses change because of their inspirational leaders. Some businesses can't survive and adapt to new technologies. Some businesses revolutionize the ways in which information is shared, and some businesses revolutionize the way in which people buy products. Some businesses disrupt and change entire marketplaces, and occasionally there are changes in the political environment that affect how businesses can operate. And a word here from Richard that every success story to do with business is a tale of constant adaptation, revision, and change. A company that stands still will soon be forgotten. And a lot of what we've looked at in theme 3 so far has been about businesses changing. We've looked at objectives and strategy. So if businesses change their strategy to achieve their objectives, this will involve change. If businesses grow, then this inevitably will involve change to the business. When we looked at decision-making techniques, we're really assessing new products, new projects, new investments to do with change. Corporate culture evolving over time or suddenly changing, again relates to change, and so does competitiveness. How do businesses respond to the competitive environment in which they're in? How do they improve competitiveness by changing? So this is a recurring theme in what we've looked at so far. So we're going to be looking at managing change here. So change creates opportunities and threats for businesses. Change shouldn't be seen as just bad, but it must be managed carefully to ensure a business maintains or it increases its competitiveness. Managing change is the process or the combination of activities involved in planning for, implementing, coordinating, and monitoring the process of change. So in this video, we're going to look at the causes of change, the difference between internal and external causes of change, and 6 typical causes of change. Then we're going to look at the effects of change. What are the typical effects of change on these 4 criteria? So let's start off. 2 types of change, internal and external. Internal forms of change are causes of change that the business is responsible for or can influence. So for example, a new leader or change in strategic direction or a significant investment decision, these would all be changes the business might make of its own accord. Whereas external change is change that is imposed upon the business from outside of its control. For example, competitors' actions or changes in the political environment or changes to the law, changes in society, changes in technology, all those kind of things will be sources or causes of external change. Now, there are 6 typical causes of change that we need to be aware of, and these are the 6. I'm going to go through each 6 and then relate the effects of these types of changes to 4 different categories. And what do we mean by these categories? Well, first of all, competitiveness. If we're trying to measure the effect on competitiveness, we're thinking about what's going to be the impact on sales, on price, on market share, on ability to have a unique selling point, perhaps even unit cost, which has a strong link to price and competitiveness. We're then going to think about the effects on productivity. So here we're talking about output per worker or output of a machine. We're talking at the nature of inputs versus outputs, perhaps the way in which production takes place. Then we have to think about what might be the effect of this type of change on financial performance. We're again thinking about profits and profitability. We're thinking about statement of financial position and liquidity. We're importantly thinking about shareholder value overall. And then finally, what might be the effect on stakeholders, employees, customers, governments, suppliers, the local community, anyone with an interest, a vested interest in the activities of the business. Let's start off with our first cause of change, which is organizational size. So businesses can both grow and contract depending on their objectives. Commonly, businesses want to grow, and that growth may involve change. For example, they may grow through new product development or through diversification, Businesses might grow through mergers and takeovers, and inevitably this would lead to change within the business. Also, businesses may not grow, they may wish to get smaller, which we often call retrenchment, which is getting smaller as part of a cost minimization exercise. And again, this may involve change, so delayering, closing down unprofitable elements of the business, or selling off elements of the business that aren't required. So changes in size can lead to changes in the business. What might be the effect of that? Well, in terms of competitiveness, often growing the business will result in economies of scale, which may reduce unit costs and so be beneficial. Again, we have to think about size and brand recognition. Typically, larger businesses have a stronger brand recognition. On the flip side, though, increasing in size may involve entering a new market, which may be challenging, and so this might have perhaps possibly an issue, a negative effect on competitiveness if we can't get that right. In terms of productivity, generally speaking, an increase in size should increase productivity, but as we get larger, perhaps we might have to consider changing the method of production, perhaps more batch and flow rather than job. What might be the impact on financial performance? Well, there might be a bit of a trade-off here. There might be increased profit through economies of scale and unit cost, but how is this growth going to be financed? If it results in an increase of gearing, i.e. taking on more debt, then we have to take into the impact of will the benefits outweigh these extra costs? In terms of stakeholders, well, what would be the impact of growth on employees? If it's mergers and takeovers, will there be any redundancies? Will there be opportunity for new jobs? What might be the impact on customers? Governments, will be the issues over competition if a firm gets too large? Suppliers as well, also the local community. So we can make links here to the effects of change in organizational side to all of these different categories. An example here might be Tesco. Now, Tesco tried to change their organizational side by expanding into new markets, into the American market with their branches of Fresh and Easy. Unfortunately, this investment, the £1 billion investment that they used to set up, didn't go very well, and they ended up selling their chains, their new chain of stores, subsequently. So here was a change in organizational size that didn't really get right, and it had a negative impact on their financial performance. Okay, cause of change number 2 is poor business performance. Poor business performance in terms of customer numbers, sales, profit, reputation will inevitably bring change, because what choice does the business have? If they're performing poorly, they've got to change or face the prospect of closing down. So in terms of change, what might they do? Well, first is they need to identify the problem. So they might use business techniques, ratio analysis, workforce analysis, market analysis, those kind of techniques that we've been studying to identify what is the problem in the business performance. And then we need to think about change. Maybe it's a change in strategy for the business with the existing management might implement, or maybe we need a change in management, a change in leadership in order to turn around the poor performance. What might be the impact again of this cause of change? Well, the impact on competitiveness. Poor performance really goes hand in hand with poor competitiveness. To think about the impact on market share and brand. Poor performance, the effect on productivity typically will be low capacity utilization, low labor productivity. What will poor performance do for financial performance? Again, we may have higher unit costs, possibly tighter margins, might be struggling for sources of finance, so liquidity issues. We might have to think about possibly cost minimization as a strategy. That would be the effect of poor performance. What might be the impact on, or the effect on stakeholders of poor performance? Poorer workforce morale, redundancies, and the impact that might have on the local community in terms of jobs, the impact unemployment might have on the government. So again, another reason why businesses might change is because of poor business performance. Well, what might be an example of poor business performance? BlackBerry would be one we might talk about. This might be a business you've heard of. And up until 2011, this business was doing very well. They experienced 10 years of consecutive growth in revenue and net incomes up to 2011. But as a result of poor business performance, their revenues started to decline and their net income started to decline. The impact of this was that their market share, which had reached the peak of nearly 20%, started to come down, and overall the effect on their financial performance was very poor for share value. So the market value of the business went from just below 80 billion all the way down to less than $10 billion in the space of 4 years just through poor business performance. Right, our third cause of change is new ownership. So this could be internal. So we're talking about a new legal status for the business. So the growth from sole trader to limited, private limited company selling shares, and then to public limited company, maybe having a share selling to the wider public, which brings in new ownership. Or it could be external, involving a merger or takeover, or it could come from a management buyout, which is where the existing managers, rather than the shareholders, buy the company from the shareholders. So what might be the impact of the change here? Well, new ownership typically bring with them a new culture, perhaps, or new leadership style, or new legal status, or new objectives, or new markets, or new products, or possibly new stakeholders. What might be the effects of new ownership? Well, if it's a merger or takeover, how successful is the integration of the two businesses? If they get it right in the long term, then there may be economies of scale. In terms of productivity, well, often there are short-term issues when we are integrating the two businesses together, or the new ownership are trying to get their point of view across. But in the long term, we may see improvement in productivity as those new measures take hold. In terms of financial performance, again, short-term, long-term. In the short term, how are we going to fund the acquisition if there is a merger or a takeover? Where is the money going to come from? Will it have a negative effect on finances in the short term? In the longer term, if we benefit from economies of scale, then there might be improvements to profitability. Again, the stakeholders, we think about the employees. Might there be a culture clash, redundancies potentially? How will the employees react? How will the government react if there is a larger business or there is new ownership? Government are often concerned about competition. They're often concerned about are the people who are buying the company fit and proper people? What would be the customer reaction to any new ownership? So a good example here would be Sheikh Mansour buying Manchester City. He transformed that business, if you like, from a fairly national, regional company into a global, international brand. Think about the impact on merchandising. Think about the impact on the workforce. Completely transformed the playing squad and the management of the business. A much larger scale, new facilities, all that kind of stuff. So here's a good example of how new ownership have really caused a significant amount of change for a business. Okay, cause of change number 4 is transformational leadership. So if a new chief executive officer or leadership team arrive at the business, they may come with their own vision, their own objectives, and change the business through new ideas, a new strategic direction, changing the culture of the business, and this can often be linked to new ownership. What might be the effect? Well, in terms of competitiveness, the new ideas we might link to innovation. They might have experience of markets and so successfully manage the movement into a new market. In terms of productivity, will there be a short-term impact? Can they introduce new working practices, or will this take time? Will they get the buy-in from the workers? Will they actually agree with the effect, with what the leadership is trying to do? In terms of financial performance, often transformational leadership can turn around poor financial performance. In terms of stakeholders, employees, again, key stakeholders. It really depends on the effectiveness of the systems in place as to how employees react. What might be the impact to the local community of the new leadership style? A good example here would be Thomas Cook and Harriet Green. So Thomas Cook were nearly in bankruptcy in around 2012. Harriet Green was appointed as chief executive, and she came in with a really inspirational. A lot of the staff who worked for her said she was very inspirational. She was very straight talking, had lots of energy and drive, and she really transformed the culture of the business. And the impact of that, the effect of that was really seen in terms of the share price. In 2012, it was nearly worth nothing as a business, and in a matter of a couple of years, she'd increased the share price by tenfold before she eventually left the business. Okay, Our second to last cause of change is one we would call PESTLE, P-E-S-T-L-E, and this is really looking at the external environment, so what's going on outside of the business in terms of P for politics, E for the economy, S for social trends, T for technology, L for the legal environment, and E for the environment, ecological environment. So in terms of politics, what might be changing in terms of government policy, in terms of tax policies, and how might that cause change within the business? How might changes in the economy, so for example, changes in the business cycle, how might that affect changes in the business? Changes in social trends, so demographics or buying trends or fashions, how might that change the business? Changes in technology can often be a very big one and very disruptive. How can new technologies impact the market? Changes in the legal environment, so changes to laws, how can that impact or cause change within a business? And then finally, how can changes in the environment, so climate change, maybe emissions legislation, how might that cause change for a business, and how might they react? So again, some of the effects, well, the impact on competitiveness will normally depend on how well a business is placed to respond to this change in the external environment. In terms of productivity, often improved technology leads to better productivity, but if there's changes in the business cycle, then this might lead to maybe spare capacity during a recession. Financial performance, often these things can have an impact on costs in terms of adjusting to new technologies or adjusting to new laws, or perhaps adjusting to new regulations or adjusting to new environmental standards. So often there can be an impact in costs we should be aware of. And then finally, stakeholders might be affected in a number of different ways: the employees, customers, government, local community, and the environment. So an example here would be maybe a change in the political environment, like Brexit. So the impact on Brexit might be felt through the exchange rate, which fell as a result of Brexit, and that would have an impact on imports and exports. It might have an impact on the cost of raw materials they're buying from other countries. They would really feel the effect of something that's gone on in the wider environment, and businesses will thrive if they can deal with that change. Okay, our final cause of change is change within the market. So changes to the market may be imposed from outside, like government's regulations or perhaps scarcity of supplies, or the market may be transformed by an existing competitor or perhaps a new entrant to the market. This links well with Porter's 5 forces. If we use that model to think about the number of customers, the number of suppliers, the level of competition within the market, we can use that to try and analyze what's going on. The effects here on terms of competitiveness, well, in terms of the change to the market, if you're the first mover, then you may have an advantage. If you're not, you may find yourself becoming obsolete. Often, changes to the market come from firms that have developed a unique selling point or something that distinguishes them from the competition. There may be impacts on market share as well. In terms of productivity, how can other firms adapt to new production methods or approaches that maybe a business has changed the market with? What might be the impact on revenue, cost, profit, and margins? Well, it depends really on if the business is being changed by another business or whether the business is doing the change to the market. Finally, the stakeholders here, other competitors, maybe employees, maybe a risk of a talent drain, that other businesses pinch your staff if they're considered a more attractive place to work. Again, there might be impacts because the government might be interested in the level of competition in the market as a result. A good example here would be something like Uber, who have really disrupted the transport market. This chart here shows that in first quarter 2014, taxis accounted for 52% of all trips taken, rental cars 39%, and Uber was just 9%. Only a year later, Uber have quickly changed this marketplace. Rental cars have stayed fairly similar in terms of journeys taken, but the taxi market has been transformed. Taxi journeys much lower now, and Uber a much higher percentage in just a year. So they've come into this market and really changed the nature of it, and the effect has been very keenly felt in terms of competitiveness and market share. So in this video, we've looked at some of the causes of change. We need to be aware of internal and external, and then the 6 typical causes of change for businesses. Now, it will depend from business to business, but we need to be able to describe the effects of change. So what might be the effects of change on competitiveness of a business, productivity, financial performance, and stakeholders of a business? That's it. Thank you very much.